The topic for this podcast is, what are the current challenges in the workplace? I'm joined with a very special guest, Susan Spiers, Chief Inspiring Officer of Spiers Consulting. Spiers Consulting provides a humanistic approach to helping clients. So today I'm joined by Susan Spiers. Susan, why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
So thanks, Tracy. Thanks for having me come today. You're my second podcast, so I'm really excited. I really want to do more of these. So I've got a pretty unique background for this space. I actually have reinvented my career 3 or 4 or 5 times. Started out as a teacher, went into nonprofit strategic planning, was a history teacher, went into franchising, and ended up in the built environment. And when I ended up in the built environment, I was introduced to real estate, IT, and workplace strategy. I was working actually for Nelson and was really intrigued by the whole idea of workplace and then how it gets enabled by tech. So I'd say for like the last 12 years, I've been working in the space of real estate tech and prop tech. And I left MRI in October, started my company Spiers Consulting in order to support technologies I feel I believe in, that I think are really helpful. I love the space because it's around servicing people. It's about making the work environment, making companies, making it better for all of us to thrive, not just to get through the day. So Spiers Consulting actually helps companies with visioning. We have an offering that we're launching in the fall around trust, and then I'm supporting tech companies that I believe in.
That's interesting. I find it interesting you have yourself listed as the Chief Inspiring Officer and that you follow a humanistic approach. And I'm curious to understand more about that. That's such a positive way to put things. I
think it actually fits the time, right? I mean, in a time where right now employees were becoming more employee driven and it's all about people. It's all about our relationships. It's all about how we connect with each other, how we work with each other, how we listen to each other. I have a couple degrees in psychology, and I've always been interested in how the brain works and how people actually work together and in order to get to where you want to go, and how to manifest your destiny and what it takes to do that. So, and over the years, I've developed a bunch of tools that have helped me get to where I am. And so I really want to take an approach of not just creating strategy to have words in a book that may or may not get executed, but rather be people-centered and human-centered and around what's going to work for each individual. Because I believe when people flourish, corporations flourish, profitability flourishes, it's a win for everybody.
It's an interesting approach. I thought we'd talk a little bit more about current challenges in the workplace. COVID is obviously a huge challenge, but it goes further than that. You have generational challenges, technology challenges, and all. So many things are happening. A lot of change in just the whole society of the world right now, and even the instability of the world right now. There's just so many factors out there. So, I'm curious from a strategy perspective. What do you think are the current priorities and what's working and not working?
So I'm going to step back and make it even bigger than what you just said. When I look at what we have had to work with or deal with over the last few years, I mean, sure, there's COVID, but then there was George Floyd. So you have the whole racial justice piece coming into play. You have supply chain problems. You have an insurrection. You have inflation. You have a potential world war. I mean, there are so many pieces that have. I almost feel like we're like a bouncing ball, like every time. So I think what I'm getting out of that is the only thing that's constant is the stuff's going to keep coming at us, and I don't think it's going to slow down. So how do we wrap our arms around what we want our workplace to be, and what do we want our real estate portfolios to be? and how do we get our heads around it? And then when you overlay that with all the tech out there, I mean, you and I both are in the world of technology. And I think I read that the impact group, I want to make sure I have it correctly. I think they said like they calculated 200, like over 300 solutions just in real estate technology. So
Right.
now you have all the stuff going on, and then you have the huge investment of tech to solve it, to solve our challenges. And then there's 12 to 20 billion dollars of prop tech investment going on. So it just begs the question that this is all pretty chaotic, and there's a lot coming at us, both from a world view and within our industry view. So what I think we need to do is step back and say, what do we want our world to look like in 3 or 4 years? Where are we now? And really create the strategy for getting there so that we're making the right decisions, we're picking the right technologies, we're spending our money correctly versus just bouncing and reacting. And I think that we don't want to turn around 3 or 4 years from now and think that things are redundant and or why did we make that decision? And I think it's pretty easy to do right now. It's pretty easy to be reactive versus proactive.
Yeah, that's very true. And, and you were talking a little bit about or touched on the future some. I mean, where do you think all this is going to go? And things like the hybrid workplace, all the latest buzzwords, right? Work from anywhere. There's a possible recession, or is that going to make a difference? I mean, how do you think this is going to play into our short and long-term strategies?
So, there are two ways to look. There are multiple ways to look at it, not just two. I'll start with Gardner. Gardner came out with a study that said that about 40% of workers out there are going to want total flex. They're going to want to be able to choose their workplace, go where they need to go in order to do the work that they want to do at the moment with the people that they want to do it with, the tools that they need, et cetera. So 40% seems like a lot when you say, where is it all going to go? If I were a planner or a business, I'd need to think about that. I read today that Accruent says the numbers are even a little higher, like maybe even 60 to 70%. So when you say where is it going to go? I think that you've got three different things playing out. One, if people saying come back to the office, whether it's some of the big banks have said, I want people back to the office, and I want them back to the office coming from a cultural, traditional perspective, coming from this is who we are and this is what we do and this is how we do it. And they probably pay people enough money that they'll get that to happen for a while until somebody else breaks from that mold. Then you've got the total remote worker, whether it's, Salesforce or Dropbox, where they're saying, just work wherever you want, just get the work done. And then in the middle is all that hybrid, right? So that's the hybrid stuff that you're talking about in terms of people. And then you've got their companies saying, come in 2 days a week, come in 3 days a week. I don't think that's going to hold over time. I think that what's going to happen is people get smart and they're like, why am I coming in? So when you say where is it all going? I think companies that take the time to really figure out what their employees need to do their work and provide that. If it's space, why are they coming in? What type of space do they need? Who are they meeting with? What do they need to happen when they're in the space? How do we create those connections? And then design to that and have that kind of space. Those are going to be the winners. And those people that don't do it, I mean, if I were coming in, for example, and I came in to meet with a few people and I knew my team was coming in, but I needed heads down space to work, and as well on the same day, not unusual, and the heads down space didn't exist because there wasn't enough of it and I couldn't find it. Am I really going to want to come in the next time? Probably not. So I think they're going to have to figure out, why are we coming in and what are we doing there and how do you support it? And I think those companies will win. The other thing I'll throw out too that I find really interesting is if people, I'm really curious about companies requiring people to come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And what I'm afraid of is come the future, let's say 2 or 3 years from now, the CFO is going to look and say, we're only 30% occupied. People really still aren't coming in, and we're totally empty 2 days a week. We need to shed the space. Like, I don't think anybody wins in that scenario, because eventually, I don't think it's going to be financial today. It's going to be financial at some point.
Yeah, and I think, part of what we're seeing here too, I think, is there's cultural changes, not only in personal changes. People are used to being in an office and having those water cooler conversations, as they're often called, and that's all changing. But another factor that I hear some is a trust factor from business owners and leaders, because they're people in many cases who have spent their entire life in an office, and they are having problems with the concept that you can trust your employees to get their jobs done when there's a supervisor not walking around the floor, right? And I think that's I know of some companies who are, well, we've got to have everybody back at the office. So you have to be at the office or you're not working. And that isn't really true in most cases, or you're not training or hiring the right people. But that's a different discussion, I guess. But it seems like there's a culture change among senior executives in some cases, or business owners, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of change management and leadership training that's needed to happen to manage to this whole new world. And I think trust goes beyond employers trusting employees. I mean, over the last 2 or 3 months, I've been getting together with colleagues, and I've been getting together in my nonprofit work and with people. And it's really exciting to connect face to face. And it's really exciting. And it occurs to me, and I'll throw it out there, because I think all we're doing is doing iterations these days of trying stuff out. But when COVID started, we all had our teams. We all worked with the people we had been working with for years. And we all trusted each other, because we all spent the last X number of years face to face in meetings, traveling together, working together, et cetera. 2 years later, with the big resignation and people changing jobs, we don't really know each other, our whole teams. And, do we really know everybody on our team, or were they hired in the last year and we've never really had that face to face? So what does it really take to build trust? And so trust between employees, that your project work's going to get done. If I haven't had the face-to-face time with you, and we haven't had those social connections where we're now connecting from the heart, talking about the human piece. Who's teaching us to do that over Zoom or Teams? Who's teaching us how to build these connections with the new people in our lives? And how does that play out over time? I think that that if I were an employer, would be one of the reasons to create compelling scenarios for people to come into the office. For example, I was at Facility Fusion, and they had a panel on 3 companies talking about how they're getting people into the office. Again, to create these connections, to create the trust, to create that working relationship. And they were doing nonprofit projects together. They were getting people into the office. They were saying, let's go rake lawns, let's go paint houses. So people were working, and then they were going out and doing something together. Again, how do you create the scenarios in our world today where just people trust each other on every level? And I think that's going to take strategy and intention.
I think you've got a really good point there. And also, we see the rise of ESG. We've talked for a long time about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a bigger rise, a big thing, but it's really evolved into even something bigger, which is ESG. And ESG in many ways is about that, especially on the social and governance side, is about communication and decision making. And the decision making isn't always top down now. It seems there's more of a two-way communication. There's a building of trust between all sides inside of a company now. It's not so much that I'm the boss, you do what I say. Now it seems like it's more, you just have to be more open and transparent and have the right kind of cultural discussions and things too. It's evolving.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it's not just we tend to in our world focus on, oh, everybody wants hybrid and come in and out. But I think that conversation and that trust is going to result in learning that each employee has a different need. I mean, I know somebody that can't work at home. I mean, it's too small,
Right.
it's too crowded. Um, and that person wants to go in the office every day. I know somebody that absolutely doesn't care. She does whatever she's told. She goes in, she does her job, she gets paid. She has to be in the office. She hasn't thought twice about it. And working at home might be fairly disruptive. She's been in the office through COVID. And so I think that it takes, and then there's the whole idea of equity. I mean, I've read stories and studies where managers are saying, well, people don't come in. How do they get promoted? How do they get their pay raises? How are they visible in the organization?
Right.
So I've been remote for over 15 years. I've been very lucky. I love being remote. And I've never had that problem, but I have been very intentional in how I remain visible to my management and to my employer and to my colleagues. And it's taking the time to connect with them and talk to them and find things in common. And I don't think we're trained to do that, right? So I think we have to learn both on the employee side, how do you do your part in creating a more equitable world, and on the manager side to really blow up some of those past behaviors and expectations. And I'll throw one more thing out. You mentioned the recession before, which I think is really interesting. I don't know what's going to happen. I think it can go two ways. One, people don't trust their employer, that they're not going to get laid off, because in the last recession, everybody got laid off. So many of us got laid off. I was one. And if the employer says come into work, do people start dropping the I'm empowered and I'm going to stay at home, and they just run back to the office because they're afraid of losing their jobs? I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm thinking not, but it's a possibility. The other side of it is employers might say, oh, this is like thing number two. Like first was the COVID seismic shift. Now I need to shed real estate because of cost. And so now actually, again, still not necessarily listening to the employee, but things are working okay with remote and hybrid. Let's just keep it that way and let's shed real estate. So don't know which way that's going to go, but either way, there's a huge trust play in this. And that could be why people end up going back, because they don't really trust.
That's interesting too. And part of the discussion, even around a recession or commercial office space in particular, also varies a lot by geography. Where
Right.
the area I'm in, they can't open office space fast enough still. It's crazy because everybody wants to live here. So you have a huge migration of people in who are willing to go into an office a few days a week or something. And small, you have a lot of small companies. You have a lot of smaller office suites, and these small companies need a footprint. They need to look real, if you will. So there's a lot of different factors in there. It's interesting. But let's talk about data. Data is, man, I mean, data rules, right? And everybody's collecting data. I always only have jokingly say, if anybody wants to know anything about my life, all they've got to look is at my Delta frequent flyer account, my American Express. They know everything there is to know. But there's a lot of truth to that, honestly. I think the importance of data in our world right now, and having the ability to gather information like that and make fairly real-time decisions and accurate decisions is very important. And what are your thoughts on that? What kind of data do we really need? I mean, how do we collect all this data? What do we do with it? I mean, it's easy. Data and analysis and is always interesting, because people are like, well, I've got all this data. It's like, well, what are you doing with it? Or they say, we've got these really cool, analytical reports. Yeah, well, how are you feeding them? So, it's a multi-pronged problem.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I think that the more technologies out there, the more data we all can start gathering. And so again, it goes back to your strategy, right? I mean, I think that companies really need to figure out what they're trying to accomplish and they've got two ways to go. And I don't know which way is necessarily the right way. I guess it depends on what you've got, who you've got on your staff. But you can say, this is where I want to go. This is the data I need, but I better collect all of it just in case. Like, just in case I left something out, I want to go back. I don't want to miss out on anything. Or you turn around and say, this is the only data I need, and that's what I'm going to collect. And that ties into my strategy and my vision for the organization. I think that data, I mean, you just look at sensor companies and all the data that they're collecting. I think that we have to start shifting from, do we really care about utilization right now? We know about 30% of the buildings are populated. That's kind of I know it's a generalization, but when I talk to companies, that's what I hear. They walk around, it's about 30%. Data can be used for so many more things, like what is human behavior. Instead of focusing on necessarily who's in your space, did they walk in or walk out, maybe it's time to really look at data that tells you how the space is being used. So for example, if I have conference rooms that fit 2 or 3 people all over the place, and I'm using my sensor data to figure out that they're packed with 7 or 8 people in them all the time, or much of the time, then I need to get different conference rooms. If I have single head down space that is never used, maybe I don't need it. But if I have it that's constantly used and I'm running out of it, then I need more head down space. So if the idea is to create a compelling reason for employees to come into the workplace and really make it so wonderful and easy for them, then you want to have space that's going to support what they're doing. And that data and collecting that data can be really, really useful and really helpful in terms of figuring out what the space is. So I think that's it. I think the other thing with data is it's kind of, people might think it's a little intrusive. I mean, there's data out there that collects what's your heartbeat, and does it have, it's getting pretty, what word am I looking for? Down in the weeds is the word I'm thinking. So how are you transparent about what data you're collecting and how you're collecting it so that people are comfortable with it? So it's about communication, it's about transparency, it's about really deciding, in my opinion, what you're trying to accomplish in collecting the data to that. And if you're going to do it and collect more data, I think you're going to find a need for a different role of individual on your staff. Like, where is the data analyst and where is the data architect and the solutions engineer? I think you're going to have people now responsible for mining that data in order to get the information you need. And I'm not sure we needed that before.
Well, and I think part of the thing about data is understanding what's good data for your organization too, because it's easy for somebody to say, hey, I've got 500 terabytes of data. So what? What kind of data do you have? Is it really providing value, or is it just confusing the issue? And I think that's where, again, having the right people looking at your data to make sure you're capturing what is important and discarding what's not.
And really stepping back and saying, what am I trying to accomplish with this data? Like, what am I trying to accomplish as an organization, and what data do I need to get there? And the other thing too, that I think over time is as we do iterations of our workplace, we can decide to have people come in. Like, we create a model. This is what our model looks like today. And then you have to measure it and then start tweaking it and making changes. So if you decide that you're going to have 2 or 3 days a week where people should come in, and even give employees the flexibility to do that, and then how do you make it easy for them to figure out if their team members are coming in? Like, I think data can get really, really interesting. And as artificial intelligence becomes more and more less clunky and less awkward in our space, I would love a world where something says to me that your team is going to be in the office Thursday at 10 o'clock, which is your low traffic time for coming into the office. And there's really good parking there, and you can actually park in this lot. And by the way, you can order on my app the lunch so that you guys don't have to leave. And you're going to meet on the third floor in the back corner at this table. And somehow it all knows that. I think it'd be really cool, make my life easy. I'm meeting with the people I want to meet with. I'm spending the least amount of time getting to the office. And by the way, the shades will come down at the exact moment that the sun is coming into the space so that you don't have glare on your computer. I don't know if we're that far away from all that. And go ahead.
Well, I think, even taking that a little further, which is, you know what, I'm actually going to go into the office today, and it's about a 50-minute commute. So tell me when I should go. Give me having that data out there. Give me the optimal time to go, because of two things. Number one, I want to minimize my travel time, but I'm also looking at my environmental footprint. Okay. I don't want to go sit in traffic for an hour and a half if I can do it in 30 minutes by waiting 30 minutes. I think there's a lot of things there that are coming down the road too.
And the other thing too, the data that's being collected. So when you look at day two, once we figure out, or as we're figuring out all this utilization stuff, I think that you brought up ESG earlier, the whole idea of environmental impact, and real estate has a huge role in that.
Right.
And how do we start looking at the data around smart buildings? And when you look at your footprint, and you look at the cost of energy and water and consumption and managing waste and all that kind of stuff, and overlay that with your utilization data, now you're getting a true picture of what it's costing for your employees to come in, for you to run your building, and then take your driving 50 minutes and what impact that has. I mean, I think that it's going to take some artificial intelligence. I think it's going to take we still have a ways to go, but I'm kind of thinking that connecting people and buildings to buildings and looking at the environment is really where a lot of the opportunity lies.
And taking advantage of those opportunities is a lot about technology that's available or coming. And one of the things that's interesting, and you and I are both, again, in commercial real estate world and facilities management world, and we have seen so many changes to technology, so much consolidation of technology and technology companies, and mergers and acquisitions. There's M&A all over the place. And it's kind of crazy. There's new tech coming out all over the place. Like you were saying, there's hundreds of products. There's thousands of sensor companies out there. I mean, it's almost overwhelming. And how do you bring order to the chaos, if you will, and make good decisions for your company?
Hire an outside consultant. I really think that in all seriousness, it's stepping back and really figuring out who you want to be, and not, if I were on the business side right now, if I were in real estate right now, I think I'd be overwhelmed by all the people calling me right now trying to sell me stuff, and I have a day job, right? I mean, I have to manage this real estate portfolio. Again, taking the human piece to this and saying, how much can I do in a day, and how much can I take the time to understand? I mean, Tracy, you and I are both in real estate tech, and how much time do we spend every day trying to make heads or tails out of the world that we're in right now? And so, and what does all this tech mean? And somebody just acquired the software company, and I actually am using that software. What does that mean for my future? And these are big $1 million often investments plus, and they're highly visible, and you don't want to fail in your career, and you want to make sure you're being proactive. So how do you find, you have the big four all do consulting, you have companies like Serco and eBiz, and, there are so many companies, there aren't so many, there are a few really good companies out there that are impact group that are helping companies sort through all of this to figure out what that path forward should be or could be. Now, if you have extraordinary interest in all of it, then go for it. I think that the whole idea is to step back and say, where do you want to go? And literally, but then, and what are the requirements to get there, and what data do you need to get there? And then look at what sensors can get you that data, and what, is it an IWMS? Is it like Planon or, or Tango or Tririga, or, to get you to where you're going to go? Or is it, more of a point solution? So I don't think you know how to answer those questions until you really figure out what it is that you want to do. And the hardest part, I think today for our clients and for companies is that today's data isn't great. I mean, employees haven't landed yet. Nobody really knows what a year from now is going to look like. So you can't look at past data pre-pandemic, because that's not going to give you the right information. And I think I saw Relogix had a chart I saw the other day where it's still all jagged in terms of return to the office. Right. And like, it really hasn't leveled out yet. So you really can't look at your current situation and say, this is it. So you have to start doing iterations. And I think it starts by talking to your employees and really hearing and listening to where they want to be right now. And the other thing I found, which is really interesting, I'm going back to ESG just for 1 second because I want to throw it in. I also heard last week that there have been studies that say good lighting, good air quality, and good, not a lot of CO2 and all the good things about your environment increase productivity. So the other thing, if I were an employer and looking at where this is going to go, is how do I get the right environment in place so that, again, employee engagement is not just an app. It's about having the right tools in the right space with the right people to do what you want to do, and the right environment, and the right management team. It's all of it. It's pretty interesting. So I don't know what you do without the right data except start iterating and testing it.
Well, part of anything to do with data or technology or any of it is user adoption. And it comes back to, I think, to your humanistic approach to things too. It's easy for a company, or easy may not be a good word, but it's normal almost for the company to say, we found the best tool for you to use, misuser, and this is going to make your life so much easier. And they roll it out and the users despise it. Right. So I think user adoption, and people are becoming so much different in how they think, even if you look at mobile software, for instance, 10 years ago, people didn't do a whole lot of things with smartphones that weren't more in the tech field, right? You guys that works out in the fields and stuff generally weren't very technical savvy. They might have still had a flip phone, right? That's not the case now. You've got everybody. You go to El Salvador and you've got a huge population down there that doesn't have a bank account, but they have a flip phone and they can trade or not a flip phone. Oh, geez, I got that on my mind now. They have a smartphone and they can trade Bitcoin. They can go out and buy things with Bitcoin now. And there's people in the States who don't even know what Bitcoin is, but you can use it to buy things in El Salvador with your smartphone. That technology adoption is even there with what they've done with Bitcoin is still coming online. But it's just typical of anything. You've got to have user adoption, or the best technology in the world will fail.
I think you're right. And that's a really good point. And I also think that we're kind of behind the times with all this too. So I went to Texas. I had to go to a funeral, and I left Minneapolis and literally went to the airport, got on a plane, went through security, got on a plane, got my car in Texas, went and met a client for lunch, ended up at my hotel, and I never took my wallet out or ID out or credit card out once. And it occurred to me that wouldn't it be great if real estate could have that kind of seamless approach? And because the reality is we are adopting technology elsewhere. Mm-hmm. we're just not adopting it. A, we don't have it, and B, what we do have, we're not adopting in our world. So I think that putting those plans in place and having the change management and having the adoption plan and the rollout plan when you take on technology is critical, because if not, I think you're wasting a lot of money, right? And so I told my story just to give an example of, we are adopting tech as humans. As humans, we're doing it outside the workplace. So how do you put the plan in place to adopt it in the workplace? And I believe you should not buy technology without that plan in place.
Well, that kind of leads to the next question I have really was, what role does the procurement process play in all this? Because it's easy for a contract staff to go out and try to, we found a product and it's the cheapest. But I think the times have changed on that now. You have to be far more proactive. And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'm starting to see a little shift in procurement, actually, where they're actually talking to the business. They're actually looking at what some of the requirements are and actually relying on the business a little more. It's not as price, at least it's a journey. I'm not saying it's all procurement, but I am starting to see a shift that it's not just price driven, but more looking at the value. And I also think the other thing procurement's looking at is the whole equity piece and trying to figure out how to meet those DBI goals for the organization and as well as meeting what the business needs. What are you finding? I mean, are you finding that it's starting to shift because you're actually out there working with those procurement organizations too?
Oh, I think so. It's not procurement coming in and deciding on a product and saying, here's what it is, we made a good deal for you or something. It's now procurement has to be engaged with like the business and the users, looking at what my potential user adoption of technology is. It sounds really great, but are we really going to adopt it? Are we going to get our money's worth out of it? I think that's more of a proactive approach. And employees, again, feeding back on ESG some, you're seeing more engagement from employees at lower levels of the organization. It's no longer C-suite or senior VPs or something sitting around a room going, this is what we're going to do. There's a lot more employee engagement in making a lot of those decisions now. And I think that trend's going to continue, because if you don't, you're going to lose people. Right now, there's more jobs than there are people in the market. And I don't care if we have a recession or not, I don't think that's really going to change a whole lot. In the long run, it's definitely not. As our population ages and retires, the economy can't grow well without, first off, creating new jobs, and you get into a discussion about like immigration and stuff as well. But if you're a company, you're going to have to fight hard for your people. So there's a lot of engagement that has to be done. But from a procurement side too, it's also about getting the most for your money. So part of it isn't just about the bottom dollar. It's if I pay $10 a seat per month for something and nobody uses it, I still threw away all that money, right? Maybe I needed to pay 12 and get something that's widely adopted. And I think you're seeing the procurement people and the thought of business in general thinking a lot better that way.
And I think that speaks to the fact that I don't think people thought of real estate as more than a cost center before the pandemic. And now we're actually the value add. I mean, I think working along with HR and IT in really figuring out how to attract and retain employees and really how to engage them, we're very much in the center of that conversation, which I think actually sends a message to procurement as well, that this is it's all taken a shift, and it's all about not adoption and also figuring out employee engagement. And it's kind of fun to be in that space, but not, and so that leads to who's leading that, right? I mean, that's the other thing too I'm watching. Are they going to have somebody come in and lead HR, IT, and real estate? Like, who is actually leading that effort? I think that still is yet to be figured out. It might be a new role.
Well, I think from a perspective of companies that are either like consulting or strategic, planners, system integrators, companies like that, part of what they have to do is they can't just be technology companies. They just can't go in and look at our cool programming anymore. It's about the overall user experience. It's about the overall company experience and the total value we bring to the organization. And total value isn't just a monetary figure
Right.
anymore. All right. And I think the companies that are going to win in the long run with technology are those who embrace things like ESG, who understand the value of their product, the value of their service isn't just about money. And I think the a lot of the companies, at least I see, that I think consider uh, companies that are just really up and coming. A lot of your smaller companies that are making a name for themselves are really going down that path. It's not just, here's not the latest shiny toy. Here's a shiny toy that brings true benefit to your whole company and your users. It's a complete experience. I don't know. That's a lot of what
So,
I'm seeing.
so I think though, before you can do that, you really, again, have to step back and really connect with your employees and figure out what it is, because technology is nothing more than an enabler. It's an enabler, and it gives you data to continue to make decisions about how to create that workplace moving forward. And I think that that you've got to take the time to figure out how to step back and do that piece of it, and not just require things of employees that are not relevant to what they're doing or how they are and how they show up in the workplace. And I think that's really, really important.
Well, one last question
No.
I've got is, the big term today is the metaverse. And we're seeing, actually, it's kind of funny because you see people arguing over where that even came from or what it really is. The gaming companies are like, well, we created that, and other people are like, no, it's just, Google and Facebook and or Meta themselves, and Microsoft, they're all over there trying to claim credit for all this. And what I'm trying to understand, and I think the metaverse is interesting, but I'm having trouble seeing, maybe it's because I'm almost middle-aged, that I'm sitting here struggling with the concept of the value it really brings, but it's going whether I like it or not. So I'm curious what you think about the idea of this metaverse, that I can be inside of a world that's not totally real. And work and collaborating with people and stuff. I'm fascinated by the concept, but personally, I like those occasional water cooler conversations and in real time, and not necessarily inside of a three-dimensional object. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm aging myself. I'm with you. You know, I do know people in our industry, colleagues. So what I do know is that companies like PwC and Accenture and the Big Four, EY, they have practices around this now. So it is happening, and a lot of and there are companies using the metaverse on board, like hundreds of thousands of people, and interview them. In the real estate world, I have some colleagues that are looking at buying land in the metaverse and developing a real estate property. And you have to pay Bitcoin for it. And the whole idea is to have another place for people to do certain types of things in this other dimensional, in this three-dimensional place. I don't understand it myself. I'm definitely studying it. I feel like it's probably when the internet started and everybody said, what? You're gonna like be on computers and you're gonna do whatever. Like, I think that's probably where the metaverse is right now in its development, where people are looking at it and it's probably a little clunky and it does certain things well, but not what the world needs well. So I'm curious, just like we're sitting here, you're on Wi-Fi in my, and we're at my house, and how we've learned how to use the internet to get to where we are today. I wonder in 20 years what that metaverse is going to look like. And then you overlay that with, when you look at real estate rationalization and portfolio rationalization, Now you're going to have employees working from anywhere, because that is going to keep going on. Overlay that with real estate in the metaverse and what they're going to be doing there, as well as the home office third place that we've got today. And I think work could look really different.
Yeah, I could walk in my office from Antarctica, right, and walk in the office and collaborate with my teammates all day long. I mean, I kind of conceptually see it, but I always question whether you start creating too fuzzy of a line between reality and fantasy, if you will. But that's the human society is changing and adapting too. So you have to go with it.
And if a doctor does an operation on you and can practice in the metaverse before the doctor actually operates on you in real time, that I can buy.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So maybe you can play with environmental controls, and maybe you can play with scenarios, and maybe there's stuff that will end up coming out of this that connect us more than disconnect us, which is kind of interesting to play with.
Interesting. Well, Susan, I really appreciate your time today. It's been an interesting conversation. I think you and I could probably sit and talk all day about subjects, and we've both been in the real estate and facilities management world so long. We could literally spend. Actually, I think we have spent hours a few times.
We have.
So thank you for taking time out.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. This was really fun. I appreciate the time as well.